Today my wife and I took the kids to a zoo in France, and I don't normally go to zoos, but this isn't a post that's going to go into the ethics of keeping animals in captivity. Although, you know, whether it's conservation or whether it's public entertainment, obviously there's huge sort of like areas, aspects of that come into the necessity of them. And that isn't what this is about. What this is about is, A, it was beautiful to be able to get so close to these animals and to be able to touch them and interact with them. It was fantastic. It was a lovely, lovely experience, and one that will sort of like stay with you. Whether that's right, you know, because those animals aren't necessarily, well, they're not, there's no necessarily about it. Those animals are not designed by nature to interact with people in that manner. But they did, and I took advantage of it, hypocrite or not. I went and I took advantage of it for the benefit of the children to be able to interact with wildlife. Anyway, the point that I want to make, that's a different topic, right? The ethical justification for captive wildlife is a different topic. But the point that I wanted to make, and this was something that was really interesting. So there was a keeper there for a tiger, and the tiger, it was beautiful. I'm going to put you some clips in here, along with this narrative. And the tiger was beautiful, stunning male, and he's walking around in his enclosure. And by all accounts, they're trying to find a mate for this guy. But this sign comes up that at 3 o'clock the tiger's going to be fed. Right, so you've got this tiger, and he's captive, and he is in a contained area. There's nothing in there, you know. There's a bit of greenery, you know, and there's space. That's all he's got. But he hasn't got anything else to distract him. So at 3 o'clock comes the time when this tiger is going to be fed, and his keeper comes along with the bucket of food, and the crowds begin to gather, ready to see this tiger get fed. And as I say, there's clips that are going to support this. Now, this is positive reinforcement at its finest, because you have complete and utter control of the environment. You have a captive subject, you have a environment that is devoid of competing motivators, right? There's nothing else going on in there apart from what you present. And the keeper turns up on the outside of the fence of this enclosure with a bucket of meat, and she begins to call the tiger.
And Maverick's a winner.
Shh. Gerard, I think, is the tiger's name. Which, as far as she's concerned, not the tiger, as far as she's concerned. But anyway, so this is the tiger's name, and there's obviously this, you know, this classical conditioning pairing that's taken place with the name of the tiger equals the presentation of food. It's clicker training for a tiger. So she turns up, the crowds are there, and she starts to call the tiger. Nothing happens. The tiger doesn't appear, and it's not a massive enclosure. You know, it's a decent size, it's a fair size, but it's not a massive enclosure. It's not becoming of not the requirements, but what is deserving of such a majestic animal. Anyway, so she calls again, and the tiger doesn't come. So she begins a narrative and starts talking about tigers and talking about this, that, and the other. And 3 or 4 minutes go by, and she calls again.
No.
And the tiger doesn't come. And she calls again, the tiger doesn't come. And this goes on for about 6 or 7 minutes, right? I think it actually went on for about 10 minutes. And in the end, she packs up the mic and whatever, the tiger's not going to come. And we went over, and I'll put this clip in as well. The tiger's actually just laying down, sunbathing. right? in the enclosure. Now, there's nothing else going on in there. The sun's out, it's warm, the tiger wants to lay down. I have this primary reinforcer. I have food that I've paired with the signal, which is your name. So your name suggests to you, or ought to mean to you, that this primary reinforcer is forthcoming. And there is the keeper doing it, doing what she does. But the tiger didn't come. Do you know what I mean? The tiger chose instead to lay in the sun. Now, good for the tiger, absolutely fine. However, when it comes to learning theory and the application of learning theory, that's got to make you think, because you've got a captive animal that has got nothing else going on beyond shrubbery and, you know, greenery and the sunshine. There's nothing else going on to compete with this raw chicken carcass that is going to be fed to you. And out comes a signal. Many times over that signal came out, but it wasn't sufficient to get you to walk probably about 35 meters from where you're laying to where that food is going to be presented. Now, you could say that that's a one-off, right? That's okay, so that tiger in that situation. However, I'm going to put pictures of this up too. She then went on to 3 hyenas in an enclosure further down, and exactly the same scenario played out. The hyenas were called by name, and the name is conditioned to be associated with food. Each hyena in turn was called. None of them moved.
C'est ça. Allez les licornes. Allez Pembo. Allez Samé. Koba, non Koba elle fait pas la tête.
Arrête de mordre, tu vas t'en sortir, arrête.
They all just simply lay there in the sun. That's all they did. They lay there. Despite this presence of this primary reinforcer that had been paired with this secondary reinforcer, which is the name of the hyenas, they didn't move. Now that, I'll put the clips in, but I would ask you to really consider, if you have animals in such sterile situations, sterile conditions, and you are presenting something upon which their existence depends, and you have paired that with a professional trainer, okay, it was somebody who works at the zoo park, a professional trainer, and the animal is failing to do that, okay? Now ask yourself, when you recall your dog, or when you ask your dog to perform a particular behaviour under distraction, and your only method of doing things is exactly the same as this zoo park trainer's method, which is I pair a particular name, the command, your name, with a consequence, the primary reinforcer. So I charge that signal, that command that I'm giving. If I cannot get 3 hyenas or 1 tiger in captivity in, well, not relatively, it's very sterile environment to comply with that command, what are the chances of me employing exactly the same process and getting a dog in an environment over which I have no control, over which is basically a larder of enticement and competing motivation, to choose instead to respond to my command? Without anything else apart from that process, how am I going to achieve that? And I tell you now, the tiger and the hyenas give you the answer. You won't.
Maverick, and Maverick's a winner.
Shh.
Alors, je vous mettais une dernière fois, je voulais vous parler du tigre blanc, puisque nous en avons une il y a de ça 3 ans. Elle s'appelle Chiara. Elle est vraiment une espèce différente de Chiara, un tigre du Bengale. Le tigre blanc